In tears, the secretary signed divorce papers, hid pregnancy, and left the millionaire 6 years later. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Claire Whitman stands at the long walnut table in a downtown Manhattan law office that smells faintly of coffee and fresh paper. Her hands clasped together so tightly that her fingers ache, the quiet hum of the city 30 floors below pressing against the windows like a held breath. And across from her sits Ethan Caldwell, impeccably dressed, unreadable, the man she once called her husband, though the word now feels heavier than it ever did when they first signed their marriage contract 6 years ago. The attorney clears his throat, slides the documents forward, and the sound of paper against polished wood feels louder than it should, because this room is silent in the way places become silent when something is ending. Claire's eyes drop to the signature line, her name printed there in clean black letters. And for a moment she sees everything she gave up folded into that ink, the late nights, the quiet dinners alone, the way she learned to disappear beside a man whose life was measured in board meetings and stock prices. Her vision blurs, and she blinks hard, refusing to let the tears fall yet, because she promised herself she would not beg, not explain, not reveal the truth that has been growing inside her for months like a fragile secret she carries alone. Ethan signs first, his pen moving quickly, decisively, the same way he signs billion-dollar deals, and when he slides the papers back to her, he does not look up, as if eye contact might complicate what he believes is already settled. Claire picks up the pen, and her hand trembles despite her effort to steady it, her heart pounding so loudly she's sure everyone can hear it. And as she signs, a tear finally escapes, landing on the paper near her name, blurring the ink just enough to make it look imperfect, human. She tells herself this is for the best, that leaving quietly is the only way to protect what matters most now, that the child she carries deserves a life far away from cold boardrooms and conditional love. The attorney offers polite words about finality and next steps, but Claire barely hears them, because all she can think about is how this moment will split her life cleanly into before and after. She stands, smooths her modest blazer, and forces herself to meet Ethan's eyes at last, searching for something she might have missed all these years, a flicker of regret, a question, anything that might ask her to stay, but his expression remains controlled, distant, as if this divorce is simply another necessary decision. Without a word, Claire turns and walks out, her heels echoing down the hallway, each step carrying her farther from the life she once thought would save her, and closer to the uncertain future she has chosen alone, a future that begins with silence, strength, and a truth she is not yet ready to share. 6 years earlier, before the quiet hallway and the signed papers, Claire Whitman's life was balanced on the edge of collapse in a way no one at Caldwell Enterprises ever noticed. Weight of the board pressing down on him in a way she had never seen before. He spoke plainly, without softness, explaining that a pending merger required stability, that the board wanted a married man at the helm, someone who looked grounded, respectable, untouchable by scandal. He did not ask her if she loved him. He did not ask if she loved anyone. He laid out the terms like a business proposal, clear boundaries, separate lives, a marriage on paper that would last until the deal was secured. Claire listened, her heart racing, because beneath his calm voice she heard desperation, and beneath her own silence she felt the walls closing in. She thought of her mother lying in a hospital bed, the steady beep of monitors, the fear in her eyes when bills arrived. She thought of eviction notices and overdue balances, of how tired she was of choosing between dignity and survival. When Ethan promised financial security, medical coverage, a way out that did not require charity, she understood that this was not romance, it was a transaction, and yet it was the first lifeline anyone had thrown her in years. She asked for one night to think, and that night she did not sleep. She sat at her kitchen table until dawn, hands wrapped around a cold mug, weighing pride against reality, love against responsibility, herself against the people she could not abandon. By morning, her decision was made. The contract they signed was thorough, almost cold, outlining expectations, appearances, discretion, and one line that made her pause longer than the rest, a clause about keeping personal matters separate, about no children, no complications. Claire hesitated, then signed anyway, because she believed she could control her heart, control her body, control the future the way Ethan controlled markets and numbers. The wedding was quiet, almost clinical, a private ceremony arranged for convenience, smiles practiced, photographs taken for press releases rather than memories. As months passed, she played her role flawlessly, standing beside him at galas, answering questions with polite ease, becoming the image of a composed executive wife, while remaining, at her core, the same woman who rode the subway home and folded her own laundry. Somewhere between the scheduled appearances and the shared silences, something shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the small moments no contract could account for, late nights when he stayed in the office too long, mornings when he asked how her mother was doing and waited for the answer. Claire did not plan to fall in love, did not plan for her life to grow more complicated, but life rarely follows the rules we write for it, and the cost of that realization would not become clear until much later, when walking away would be the only choice she had left. Time moved forward quietly after the contract was signed, settling into a routine that looked perfect from the outside and felt carefully measured on the inside. Claire learned the rhythm of Ethan Caldwell's world, the early mornings that began before sunrise, the late nights that stretched past 10, the endless stream of meetings measured in percentages and projections. She adjusted without complaint, choosing dresses approved by public relations, memorizing names of donors and board members, smiling when cameras appeared and stepping half a pace behind him when they disappeared. In public, she was polished and composed, the ideal executive wife. In private, their shared penthouse felt more like a hotel suite than a home, quiet, spacious, and emotionally distant, with doors that closed softly and conversations that stayed practical. They ate dinner together only when schedules required it, exchanging updates like colleagues rather than spouses, yet slowly, almost imperceptibly, the lines began to blur. Ethan noticed when Claire stayed late to organize files without being asked, when she brought him coffee during long nights not because it was her job, but because she saw the exhaustion in his eyes. Claire noticed the way he asked about her mother with genuine concern, how he arranged better health coverage without ever mentioning it, how he listened when she spoke instead of checking his phone. The contract had rules, but life ignored them. One winter evening, after a charity event ran longer than expected, they sat alone in the car, traffic crawling along Fifth Avenue, the city glowing outside the windows. The silence between them was different that night, heavier, charged with things neither had planned to feel. They spoke quietly, honestly, about pressure, loneliness, and the cost of always being in control. Nothing inappropriate was said, nothing promised, yet when Claire returned to her side of the bed that night, her heart was unsettled in a way she could not explain away. Weeks later, subtle changes began to surface, the kind easy to dismiss at first, fatigue that lingered, mornings when the smell of coffee turned her stomach, a strange awareness of her own body that made her pause. Claire told herself it was stress, the pace of their lives, until one afternoon she stood alone in a pharmacy aisle, staring at a small box she never expected to need. The confirmation came quietly, undeniably, and when she sat on the edge of the bathtub afterward, the world seemed to tilt. A child had no place in their arrangement, no place in the carefully controlled narrative Ethan's life depended on. She thought of the clause she had signed without protest, the promise she had made to keep things uncomplicated, and she understood, with a calm that surprised her, that telling him now would only end one life, without securing another. Claire chose silence not out of fear, but out of resolve. She would protect this new life the only way she knew how, by carrying the weight herself. She continued to attend events, continued to smile, continued to fulfill every expectation placed on her, while inside she planned for a future that did not include the man she was quietly falling in love with. Each day brought her closer to a truth she could not share and a goodbye she could not yet imagine, even as Ethan, unaware of the change growing between them, began to rely on her presence more than the contract ever required. Friends, not her co-workers, not even her mother, who was finally recovering and believed her daughter had found security at last. At home, the penthouse remained orderly and restrained, yet something between Claire and Ethan continued to shift. He grew more present, asking her opinion during late-night dinners, listening when she spoke about things unrelated to work, trusting her instincts in ways he did not with anyone else. For the first time since the contract began, Claire allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like if the rules no longer applied, if the warmth she sensed could become something honest and lasting. That hope, quiet and dangerous, made her careful, because she understood how easily it could be taken away. The change did not go unnoticed by everyone. Ethan's mother, Margaret Caldwell, began watching Claire more closely during family functions, her polite smiles edged with scrutiny. She commented on Claire's background, her choices, the speed with which she had entered Ethan's life, questions framed as concern but carrying something sharper underneath. Claire answered calmly, respectfully, even as her instincts warned her to stay alert. Tension built slowly, like pressure beneath the surface, until one evening Ethan returned home later than usual, his tone distant, his questions pointed. He asked where she had been that afternoon, why a meeting had been rescheduled without his knowledge, why certain documents were missing from his office. Claire explained what she could, her voice steady, unaware that a narrative was forming without her. Margaret had spoken to the board, hinting that Claire's priorities were no longer aligned with the company, that personal matters were interfering with professionalism, that lines were being crossed. Ethan, exhausted and protective of the structure he had fought to maintain, began to doubt without realizing it, interpreting Claire's careful secrecy as avoidance rather than necessity. The distance between them widened in subtle ways, conversations cut short, glances avoided, trust strained by unspoken accusations. Claire felt the shift immediately, the familiar sense of being evaluated rather than understood, and she knew, with a clarity that left her chest tight, that the balance was tipping. She stood alone one morning at the penthouse window, the city stretching endlessly below, a hand resting unconsciously against her abdomen, and made a decision that would shape everything that followed. If this world could not hold the truth she carried, then she would leave it, before it could take anything more from her. The contract had saved her once, but it could not protect her now, and love, however real it had become, was no longer enough to keep her where she was not truly safe. The breaking point arrived without drama, without raised voices or slammed doors, arriving instead through formality and distance, which somehow hurt more. Claire Whitman sensed it the moment Ethan Caldwell asked her to meet him in his office during business hours rather than waiting until the penthouse was quiet. The room felt colder than usual, sunlight filtered through steel and glass, and the desk between them looked impossibly wide. He did not invite her to sit. He stood with his hands braced against the edge, eyes focused on a folder rather than her face, as if he needed something solid to anchor himself. He spoke carefully, choosing words that sounded reasonable, professional, words shaped by advisors and expectations rather than feeling. He said the board was concerned. He said there had been questions about her discretion, her priorities, her influence. He said his mother believed boundaries had been crossed, and that the arrangement they once agreed upon was no longer clean. Claire listened, her pulse steady despite the tightness in her chest, recognizing the tone of someone who had already decided what must be done. When he finally said the word divorce, it landed softly but carried enormous weight, as if an entire chapter of her life had been quietly closed without her consent. She did not interrupt him. She did not defend herself. She understood that explanations would only complicate a story already written in someone else's voice. Ethan avoided her eyes when he mentioned that the separation would be quick, discreet, handled with respect. He framed it as protection, for both of them, for the company, for the future. Claire nodded, because in that moment she realized that telling him the truth would not save what they had. It would only entangle it further, pulling an innocent life into a conflict it did not choose. She thought of the nights she had spent planning, the savings she had quietly set aside, the apartment she had already arranged to rent under a different name. She had prepared for this, even if she had hoped it would never come. When the paperwork arrived days later, delivered by a legal assistant who spoke gently and avoided eye contact, Claire signed where indicated, her hand steady despite the tears she wiped away before anyone could see. The final meeting was brief, respectful, almost kind in its restraint, and when it ended, she walked out of the building she had once believed would become her permanent home. The city felt louder outside, more alive, as if reminding her that life continued regardless of private heartbreak. That night, alone in the small apartment she had chosen for its anonymity, Claire packed the last of her belongings, folding clothes slowly, deliberately, each movement grounding her. She placed one hand against her abdomen and whispered promises she hoped she could keep, promises of safety, honesty, and love unburdened by conditions. By morning, she was gone, her resignation submitted, her phone number changed, her presence erased as thoroughly as the contract that had once bound her. Ethan returned to a quieter penthouse, believing he had resolved a complication, unaware that the greatest truth of his life had walked away in silence, choosing sacrifice over confrontation and strength over explanation. The first months after Claire Whitman disappeared were the hardest, not because they were dramatic, but because they were quiet in a way that left no room for distraction. She moved to a small coastal town several hours north of the city, a place where no one knew her last name and no one asked questions when she paid rent on time and kept to herself. The apartment was modest, just over 600 square feet, with a single bedroom, a narrow kitchen, and a window that looked out toward the water, and it felt safe in a way the penthouse never had. Claire found work quickly, first at a local administrative office, then part-time from home, choosing stability over ambition, choosing peace over recognition. When her son was born, she held him close and felt a kind of certainty she had never known before, the quiet conviction that every sacrifice had been worth it. She named him Lucas, a name that felt strong and gentle at the same time, and promised herself that his life would be defined by honesty, even if hers had been shaped by silence. Meanwhile, Ethan Caldwell returned to a life that looked unchanged but felt subtly hollow. The board praised his decisiveness, his mother expressed relief, and the company continued to grow, yet the absence Claire left behind followed him into every room. He told himself the arrangement had ended as it should have, that emotions had no place in a structure built for efficiency, and still he found himself pausing before speaking, expecting her voice to answer questions she no longer handled. Nights grew longer, the penthouse quieter, and success felt increasingly theoretical without anyone to share it with. 6 years passed in this parallel rhythm, Claire building a life measured in school schedules and small routines, Ethan accumulating milestones that brought applause but little warmth. Lucas grew into a thoughtful child, curious and observant, with a habit of asking questions that made Claire smile and ache at the same time. She taught him kindness, resilience, and the value of choosing people over appearances, careful never to speak bitterness aloud. Ethan watched his peers celebrate families and milestones he had quietly stepped away from, telling himself that some choices, once made, could not be undone. Then one autumn afternoon, those separate worlds edged closer together without either of them realizing it. Claire took Lucas into the city for a children's museum trip, a rare treat that excited him beyond measure, while Ethan attended a charity event for early education, standing beneath banners he had approved months earlier without a second thought. The timing was coincidence, nothing more, but the city had a way of circling unfinished stories back toward their beginnings. Claire felt the familiar weight of memory as they walked through crowded streets, her hand firm around Lucas's, reminding herself that the past had no claim on the life she had built. Ethan felt an unexplainable pull as he moved through the event, a sense that something important was just beyond his reach, waiting to be recognized. Neither of them understood yet that the years of silence were about to end, not through confrontation or accusation, but through the quiet, undeniable presence of a child who carried the truth they both deserved to face. The encounter unfolded without announcement, slipping into existence the way truths often do, quietly and without permission. Claire Whitman was kneeling beside an interactive exhibit, helping Lucas read the instructions aloud, when she felt a sudden stillness settle around her, the kind that makes the air feel heavier. She looked up instinctively, and for a brief second the years collapsed. Ethan Caldwell stood a few feet away, frozen mid-step, his attention drawn not to her face at first, but to the child at her side. Lucas laughed at something on the screen, a sound clear and bright, and when he turned, His profile caught the light in a way that struck Ethan with unsettling familiarity. The same line of the jaw, the same thoughtful crease between the brows when he concentrated. Ethan felt his chest tighten as recognition stirred without context, a feeling that made no sense and yet refused to be ignored. Claire rose slowly, her body reacting before her mind caught up, positioning herself just slightly in front of Lucas, a protective instinct she had honed over years of single motherhood. Their eyes met, and the shock in Ethan's expression was unmistakable, layered with confusion and something that looked dangerously like regret. Neither spoke at first. The noise of the museum faded into background hum as if the world had narrowed to this single moment. Ethan finally managed her name, spoken softly, almost cautiously, and Claire nodded, her face composed despite the rush of memories threatening to surface. Lucas tugged at her sleeve, asking who the man was, his voice curious rather than wary, and Claire felt her breath catch. She introduced Ethan simply, as someone she used to work with, her tone even, careful, choosing safety over honesty in that instant. Ethan smiled politely at Lucas, his mind racing as he took in the boy's age, his mannerisms, the way he watched Claire with complete trust. Something shifted then, a calculation forming not from numbers or contracts, but from timing and instinct. He asked how long Claire had been back in the city, questions that sounded casual but carried weight beneath them, and she answered briefly, keeping details sparse, aware that every word mattered now. The conversation ended politely, awkwardly, with promises that were not spoken aloud, and as Claire walked away, her heart pounded in a way it had not in years. She felt exposed, unsteady, as if the carefully ordered life she had built might suddenly be examined under a harsher light. Ethan watched them go, unable to shake the image of Lucas holding Claire's hand, the way the child leaned into her, as if the world made sense only when she was near. That night, alone in his hotel room, Ethan replayed the encounter again and again, each detail sharpening into something undeniable. He pulled old timelines from memory, dates he had once dismissed as irrelevant, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to question the version of events he had accepted without challenge. Claire lay awake in her apartment hours later, listening to Lucas's steady breathing from the next room, knowing the quiet separation she had maintained for 6 years was no longer guaranteed. The past had found them not through accusation or demand, but through a child who carried its imprint, and both of them sensed, with equal parts fear and inevitability, that the truth was closer now than it had ever been before. The questions Ethan Caldwell tried to ignore refused to stay buried, resurfacing in quiet moments and sleepless nights until they demanded answers. He began with dates, pulling old calendars and legal documents from storage, tracing the timeline of the divorce with a precision he once reserved for mergers. Each calculation led him back to the same conclusion, one that tightened his chest the longer he examined it. Lucas's age aligned too closely with the months Claire had grown distant, with the unexplained absences, with the careful way she had stepped back just before everything collapsed. Ethan told himself coincidence was possible, but his instincts, sharpened by years of reading people, would not accept it. He requested discreet inquiries, nothing invasive, just confirmation of facts he believed he already knew. When the results arrived, understated and factual, they did not accuse, they simply revealed, and the truth settled over him with quiet finality. The child he could not forget was his. The realization did not come with anger, but with a hollow ache that spread slowly, touching every memory he had misunderstood. He remembered Claire signing the divorce papers with shaking hands, remembered the tears she tried to hide, remembered how easily he had accepted explanations that required no effort from him. The weight of what he had missed pressed down until he could no longer remain silent. He reached out carefully, requesting a meeting without demands or entitlement, and Claire, after days of hesitation, agreed, choosing transparency over fear. They met in a quiet park overlooking the water, neutral ground that felt safe for conversation neither of them could avoid any longer. Claire listened as Ethan spoke, his voice stripped of authority, shaped instead by accountability. He told her he knew, that he had confirmed what his heart already suspected, and that he was sorry, not just for leaving, but for never asking the right questions when it mattered. Claire held herself steady, years of restraint keeping her calm, even as emotions surfaced she had long contained. She did not deny the truth. She told him about the pregnancy, about the choice to stay silent, about the certainty that telling him then would only place their child at the center of a power struggle he did not deserve. She explained that leaving had been an act of protection, not punishment, that she had chosen peace over privilege because love, to her, meant safety. Ethan listened without interruption, absorbing each word with the seriousness of someone finally willing to face consequence. He apologized again, not for missing out, but for failing to create a space where honesty felt possible. Claire did not offer forgiveness easily. She spoke of boundaries, of trust rebuilt slowly, of a child whose life could not be disrupted by regret alone. Ethan agreed without hesitation, understanding that presence would need to be earned, not assumed. When Lucas approached, curious and unafraid, Ethan introduced himself simply, without titles, kneeling to the child's level and offering nothing more than patience. Claire watched closely, prepared to step in if needed, but Lucas smiled, sensing no threat, only attention. In that moment, the truth was no longer just a revelation between two adults, but a living reality that demanded responsibility. As the sun dipped lower over the water, Claire felt the past loosen its grip, not because it had been erased, but because it had finally been acknowledged. The secret she carried for 6 years no longer belonged to her alone, and while the future remained uncertain, it was no longer built on silence. The rebuilding did not happen all at once, and Ethan Caldwell did not expect it to. He began where Claire Whitman said it had to begin, with consistency rather than promises. He rearranged his schedule to be present, not as a visitor bearing gifts, but as a father learning routines, school drop-offs, bedtime stories, and the small rituals that shaped Lucas's days. He listened more than he spoke, accepted correction without defensiveness, and showed up even when it was inconvenient, understanding that trust was constructed through repetition. Claire watched closely, cautious but fair, measuring. Change not by words, but by action. Over time, the tension eased into something steadier, a working partnership grounded in respect, then a gentler connection shaped by shared responsibility. Ethan addressed the past with the same transparency he brought to the present. He confronted the assumptions that had guided his decisions, acknowledged the role his silence had played, and corrected the record where it mattered, not with spectacle, but with accountability. When questions arose at work, he set boundaries that prioritized family without explanation, redefining leadership in ways that surprised those around him. Claire remained independent, keeping her life anchored where it was, unwilling to uproot stability for sentiment alone. Ethan accepted that condition without argument, understanding that love, if it returned, would do so freely or not at all. Lucas adapted with the ease of a child who senses safety, building his own relationship with Ethan at a pace that felt natural, curious, and unforced. Months passed, marked by birthdays celebrated together, shared dinners that no longer felt awkward, and conversations that extended beyond logistics into honesty. One evening, after Lucas had fallen asleep, Ethan asked Claire to walk with him along the water, the city lights reflecting softly across the surface. He did not kneel, did not produce a ring, did not speak of contracts or second chances. He spoke of choice. He told her he loved her without expectation, that he respected the life she had built, and that if there was room in it someday, he wanted to earn a place beside her, not ahead of her, not above her. Claire listened, her emotions steady, the weight of years settling into clarity. She told him she believed in growth, that forgiveness was a process, and that love, when real, did not demand urgency. She did not say yes or no. She said not yet, and meant it as possibility rather than refusal. Ethan accepted that answer with gratitude, knowing it was honest. As they walked back, the future felt neither fixed nor fragile, but open in a way it had never been before. The story they shared no longer belonged to secrecy or misunderstanding, but to intention, responsibility, and a quiet hope grounded in truth. In choosing patience over possession and presence over pride, they stepped forward not as a fairy tale reclaimed, but as a family defined by resilience, proving that love does not need to be rushed to be real, and that the most meaningful commitments are built one deliberate day at a time.